Good evening. Welcome to the Fright Files. My name is Chris Harmon, but you can call me Dr. Fright. We are waiting on Madam Mina to join us as she is awakening from her tomb. Tonight, you will hear fascinating stories, or should I say, very frightening stories, ranging from the least frightful to the most frightful of them all. Before we begin, you must ask yourself that most all-important question. Can you survive till the end? Let's begin, shall we? This first story is a very frightful tale. That I like to call The Veil. You see, in 1770, the Reverend Joseph Moody died at York, Maine, where he had long held a church, and where in his latter years his face was never seen by friends or relatives at home. When anyone was by one the street and in the public, his visage, excuse me, let's try this again, folks. Sorry for the interruption. It is a frightful night here. In 1770, the Reverend Joseph Moody died at York, Maine, where he had long held the pastorate of a church, and where in his latter years his face was never seen by friend or relative. At home, when anyone was by one end of the street and in the pulpit, his visage was concealed by a double fold of crape that was knotted above his forehead. And fell to his chin, the lower edge of it being shaken by his breath. When first he presented himself to the congregation with features masked in black, great was the wonder and the talk about it. Was he deemed? His Simmons were too logical for that. Had he been crossed in love? He could smile through the smile was sad. Had he been scorched by accident or illness? If so, no physician knew of it. After a time, it was given out that his eyes were weakened by reading and writing at night, and the wonder ceased through the veiled person was less in demon for weldings, christenings, and social gatherings, and more Excuse me, folks, we are having technical difficulties here with our Wi-Fi. Let us move on to our second story of the evening. I call this story The Candle Man. In the mist-shrouded village of Gloomic, where the fog clung to the earth like a heavy blanket, and the nights seemed to stretch on forever, there was a story that everyone knew but no one dared to speak of aloud. It was the tale of the Candle Man, a mysterious figure who appeared only on the darkest of nights, carrying a single flickering candle. The elders whispered that those who crossed paths with the Candle Man were never seen again, their souls trapped forever in the wax of his ever-burning candle. Thomas was a boy with a restless spirit and a thirst for adventure, the kind that often led him into trouble. He had heard the tale of the Candle Man many times, told in the hushed tones of the frightened villagers around the hearth. But unlike the others, Thomas did not fear the story. He was intrigued by it. He longed to see if his legend was true, to know if the Candle Man was real or just another ghost story meant to keep children in their beds. And then it happened. You see, one night when the fog was so thick even the moon could not pierce through it, Thomas decided to test his courage. He waited until the village was asleep, the lights in the window extinguished, and then he slipped out of his home, a small lantern cluttered in his hand, a small lantern clutched so deep in his hand he could almost see the blood coming from his fingertips. The streets were deserted by the air, and it was thick and heavy with an unnatural silence. The only sound was the soft church and crunch of Thomas's footsteps on the damp cobblestones. As he wandered through the empty streets, Thomas began to feel a chill creeping up his spine. The fog seemed to grow thicker with each step, swirling around him like a living thing, obscuring the path ahead. Those houses of the villages loomed out of the mist like ghosts, their outlines blurred and shifting. Thomas's heart began to race, but he pushed the fear aside, telling himself that it was just the fog playing tricks on his mind. But then he heard it, a faint, almost impeccable sound. The flicker of a flame. Thomas froze, his breath catching his throat. He strained his ears, trying to locate the source of the sound, but the fog muffled everything. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a faint flickering light just ahead of him, barely visible through the swirling mist. Curious and fear warmed him, but Thomas couldn't resist the pull of the light. He began to walk towards it, his feet moving almost of their own accord. The closer he got, the more he could make out the figure holding the candle. The light revealed a tall, shadowy silhouette, its face hidden in the darkness, the candle burning brightly in its outstretched hand. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the figure. The air around him grew colder, the fog so thick now that he could barely see his own hands. The candle's flame flickered out and danced, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground. Thomas wanted to turn back, to run as fast as he could, but his body betrayed him, his legs carrying him closer to the Candle Man. The figure remained still, silent as the grave, its face a void of darkness. As Thomas drew near, the Candleman extended the candle towards him, the flame reflecting in Thomas's wide, terrified eyes. The light was mesmerizing, pulling him in, making his thoughts sluggish and his body so heavy. Suddenly the flame flared brighter, flared up high as it could go. Thomas felt a searing cold rush through his veins. freezing him in place. He couldn't move, could barely breathe, as if the very life was being drained from him. His vision blurred, the world around him folding into darkness as his soul was drawn into the candle's flame. The last thing Thomas saw before the darkness claimed him was the candleman's face, or rather the obscene of one. Beneath the hand there was nothing but shadows, a deep, endless void that seemed to swallow all light. Dr. Fright is having fun. The candleman turned, the candle now burning brighter than before, and disappeared into the fog, leaving behind nothing but the echoes of Thomas's final breath. The next morning the village awoke to a thick, oppressed fog that seemed heavier than usual. As the villagers went about their day, they noticed something strange at the church altar. A new candle, small, burning with a steady, unwavering flame. The wax dripped slowly, each drop glistening like a tear, but no one questioned where the candle had come from or why it never seemed to go out. The villagers spoke in hushed whispers of Thomas's disappearance, but no one dared to suggest what they all secretly feared. As so, the story of the Candleman continues. A cautionary tale passed down through the generations. The villagers would often glance at the candle on the altar, its flame flickering ever so slightly, and shuddered at the thought of the souls trapped within the wax, their voices forever silenced. But at night, when the fog rolled in and the village was shrouded in darkness, some claimed they could hear the faint flicker of a flame and see a shadowy figure moving through the mist, carrying a candle that burned with the light of lost souls. And in those moments, the villagers would lock their doors and draw their curtains tight, praying that the candleman would pass them by, and they would not become the next to vanish into the light. Hope you enjoyed that frightening tale of the Candleman. I want to say hello to our frightful fans. And here, my friends, is Madam Mina, ready to join us with a frightful tale. Hello, Madam Mina. Come and take the frightening stage.
Hello, Dr. Fright. Are you ready? Are you ready for a frightful Friday?
Oh yes, I've drank my blood and ate my bones. I'm ready for a frightful tale on my throne.
Good, 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 good. All right. So tonight's story is submitted to Reddit, and it's by the user Bezo Doodoo. As a 4-year-old, I frickin' hated tying my shoes. I was terrible at it, and progress was just not happening. One morning, I was throwing a fit because my mom told me to tie my shoes before we left the house, and I was trying to avoid this horrible responsibility while crying and screaming on the third or fourth step of the staircase. The ceiling above the staircase extended from the second floor horizontally to the space above the first step, where it met a vertical wall that connected the second floor ceiling to that of the first. Imagine a big upside down L. So I'm screaming on one of the lower steps, and my gaze drifts upwards after a few minutes. I stop crying immediately and I go silent. I distinctly remember seeing a man in a sharp black suit with the head of a boar, only blue, complete with tusks and fur, bracing himself in the corner of the ceiling like a ninja above my head, staring down at me. He didn't say anything to me, but I know what he wanted. My mom began to ask me what happened, noticing my abrupt change in mood, and I cut her off in a monotone, saying only, "He told me to be good." Okay, back to you, Dr. Fright.
Ah, yes, that one sends shivers down my spine. And now we move on to our third story of the evening. This one may not be for the faint of heart, but then none of the Fright File tales are for the weak of heart. I call this tale The Whispering Violin. In the remote villages of Shadowmoor, nestled deep within a valley surrounded by towering snow mountains, the people live simple, quiet lives. The village, isolated from the outside world by the rugged terrain, had its share of superstitions and old tales passed down through generations. One such tale was that of a whispering violin, an instrument of haunting beauty and malevolent power. The villagers spoke of it in hushed tones, warning of the curse that clung to the strings. The strings said to have been soaked in the tears of lovers scorned and betrayed. Esme was a girl with music in her soul. From a young age she had been captivated by melodies and harmonies, finding solace in the notes that floated through her mind. She had taught herself to play the old violin her father had left behind, spending hours each day practicing in the quiet of her room, the music of a balm for her restless spirit. But the violin she played was old and worn, its sound thin and ready, and Emma entertained herself and even dreamed of finding an instrument worthy of love for music. The violin she played was old and worn, its sound thin and ready. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Esme wandered through the outskirts of the village, she stumbled upon an old abandoned church. The building was crumbling, its stone walls covered in ivy, its roof sagging under the weight of years. Curiosity picked Emma. She pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges creaking in protest, and stepped inside. The interior of the church was dark and cold. The air was thick with a scent of damp wood and decay. But as Esme's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed something gleaming in the shadows near the altar. Her heart quickened as she approached, her footsteps echoing in the silence. There, lying on a dusty pew, was a violin unlike any she had ever seen. The violin was exquisite, its wood dark and polished to a rich, deep luster. The strings, though old, seemed to hum with a faint, almost impeccable melody, as if they were alive with echoes of forgotten songs. Esme reached out to touch it, her fingers trembling with excitement the moment her hands brushed the wood. A shiver ran down her spine, and she felt a strange, almost magnetic pull towards the instrument. Unable to resist, Esme picked up the violin, the weight of it comforting in her hands. She could feel the music within it, waiting to be released, and she knew she had to play it. Without a second thought, she carried the violin home, her heart pounding with anticipation. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the village was bathed in twilight, Esme sat by her window, the whispering violin cradled in her lap. She drew the bow across the strings, and the instrument sprang to life, its voice rich and resonant, filling the room with a haunting haunting melody. The music was unlike anything she had ever heard or ever played before, each note infused with a depth of emotion that seemed to reach into her very soul. As Esme played, she began to notice something strange. Yeah, the violin's whispers, once faint and distant, grew louder, more instant. At first she couldn't make out the words, but the music swelled. The whispers became clearer, more revealing the darkest secrets of those who listened. The villagers, drawn by the sound of the violin, gathered outside Esme's window, their faces pale in the folding light. They stood in silence, mesmerized by the music, unaware of the danger that lurked within the notes. But as the whispers grew louder, as the atmosphere grew more intense, the village began to change. The violin spoke of hidden affairs, of lies and betrayals, of long buried grudges and unspoken resentments. The secrets were twisted and cruel, turning friends against each other, lovers into enemies. The villagers, their minds filled with the venomous whispers that began to and they began to argue and fight, the bonds that had held them together unraveling before Esme's eyes. Esme watched in horror as the village descended into the chaos, the music still flowing from her fingers even as she tried to stop. The violin had taken hold of her, its whispers filling her mind, drowning out her thoughts. Yeah, Yeah, she tried to put the instrument down, but it was as if her hands were no longer her own hands, the bow moving across the strings with a life of its own. The violin's voice grew darker, more malevolent, and Esme felt a cold dread settling over her. The whispers told her of the violin's origin, a tale of a lover's betrayal, of a heart broken beyond repair. The violin had been cursed by the scorned lover. Its strings soaked in the tears of the broken-hearted. It fed on the misery it created, growing stronger with each note. Each secret revealed. Desperate to break free of the violin's grip, Esme tried to destroy it. She threw it into the ground, but the instrument did not shatter. Instead, it lay there humming with a dark energy that whispers growing louder, more frenzied. The villagers, driven mad by the secrets of they had heard, began to turn each other. The villagers, driven mad by the secrets they had heard, began to turn on each other with their eyes with anger and fear. The violin would not allow her to stop playing, its curse binding her to the music, to the darkness it spread. Esme realized, too late, the true nature of the violin. It was not just an instrument, it was a weapon, a tool of destruction, a tool designed to tear apart the fabric of the village. And as the final note rang out, the violin's whispers reached a crescendo, filling Esme's mind with a voice and voices. Her vision blurred, her strength drained, and she felt her body collapse to the floor. The violin still clutched in her hands. The whispers folded into silence, and the village was left in ruins, the people broken and scattered, their lives forever altered by the secrets they had heard. When the villagers finally returned to Esme's house, they found her lifeless body, the whispering violin lying beside her. The instrument was silent, its strings still, its curse complete, its curse solid. The villagers fearful, the violin's power buried into deep within the earth, hoping to seal away its darkness. But the whispering violin was not so easily silenced. It lay dormant, waiting for the next musician to find it, to pick it up and play its cursed melody. You see, the legend of the whispering violin lived on, a tale of sorrow, a tale of betrayal, a tale of warning to those who would seek to uncover the secrets hidden within the music. And in the quiet of the night, when the wind howled through the mountains, some swore they could still hear the faint strings of a violin whispering in the darkness, waiting for the next soul to fall under its spell. That was the tale of the whispering violin. And now let's see what Madam Mina has to say in her next frightening tale. But before we begin, I want to say hello to all my frightful fans in the audience. It is a very frightful Friday night indeed. And now, Madam Mina, what do you have in store for us?
Okay, so this story was submitted to Reddit by the user J. Jin Dallas. It goes, my dad's brother had a lake house far north near the Canadian border. He was also an amateur astronomer and would wake us up at like 3 a.m. to look at Saturn's rings and stuff through the telescope. Very cool. One night, when I was about 15, it was hot and I couldn't get back to sleep, so I went out and sat on the dock. No AC back then. It was dark, no moon, but zillions of stars. Aurora Borealis, too. I was trailing my hand through the water when something grabbed it. It wasn't a fish nibbling on my fingers or anything. It was an actual hand wrapped around my hand. I yanked it back before it could get a good grip, and I felt the fingers slide across my hand back into the water. And then I sat frozen, too scared to move, listening to weird sounds from under the dock. I finally crawled back down the dock to dry land. I'd been swimming in that lake thousands of times, including at night, and never felt threatened or like I was unsafe. No idea what that was about. What do you have in store for us next, Dr. Fright?
Ah, yes. Thank you, Madam Mina. I now tell us a tale that may send many people into a state of weird dreams and odd thoughts, because this next tale is called The Painted Door. And when you hear what makes this story and tale so unique, you may give second thoughts when opening doors. Let's begin, shall we? You see, at the edge of a once thriving town, where the streets now lay cracked and forgotten, stood a mansion, a relic of time, when life bustled through the town's veins. The mansion, with its crumbling walls and overgrown gardens, had long been abandoned, its windows dark and empty like the hollow eyes of a ghost. But there was one feature of the mansion that had always stood out, a detail that made even the bravest souls shudder, a door, a door that no one could open. The door set into the farthest corner of the mansion's main hallway. Unremarkable at first glance, the paint was chipped and faded, the wood warped and splintered with age. But those who ventured close to it enough to truly look at it found themselves overwhelmed by a sense of dread, an inexplicable terror that seeped into their bones and gnawed of their sanity. The door was an enigma, a mystery that hell had defied explanations for decades. The townspeople spoke of it in hushed tones, recounting stories of those who had tried to open it, only to be driven mad by what lay behind. For years, the mansion remained empty, a mountain to the town's forgotten post. But that all changed when a new family arrived, seeking to breathe life back into the decaying structure. The family, the Tanners, had moved to town in search of a fresh start. The father, David, had taken a job at the nearby factory, and its wife, Helen, had fallen in love with the mansion's old world charm, desperate its obvious state of despair. Their son, Jacob, a quiet and curious boy of 12, was less enthusiastic about the move, but he soon found himself captivated by the mansion's deep, dark secrets. From the moment they moved in, Jacob felt the pull of a painted door. It was as though the door was alive, watching him, waiting for him with unseen eyes, waiting for the night's moment, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Every time he walked by, he felt a cold chill run down his spine, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the door was somehow changing, new cracks opening in the wood, fresh smears of paint that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking. The door seemed to beckon him, calling to him in a voice that only he could hear. The rest of the family seemed oblivious to the door's presence, but David was preoccupied with his work, and Helen busied herself with cleaning and restoring the mansion's many rooms. But Jacob couldn't ignore it. The door consumed his thoughts, filling his dreams with dark, twisted images that left him waking in a cold, cold sweat. He tried to tell his parents, but they dismissed the concerns as the product of an overactive imagination. Just an overactive imagination, my ass, said Jacob. Determined to uncover the door's secrets, Jacob began to spend more time in the hallway, watching, watching, waiting for something, anything at all to happen. And it wasn't long, no, it wasn't long before his patience was rewarded. You see, one stormy night, as the winds howled through the trees and the rain lashed against the windows, Jacob lay awake in his bed, the sound of the storm echoing in his ears. He was restless, his mind churning with thoughts of the door. Unable to sleep, he decided to go downstairs, hoping to calm his nerves with a glass of water. Then, then, as he reached the bottom of the stairs, he heard it, a faint, rhythmic knocking coming from behind the painted door. The sound was barely audible over the storm. It sent a jolt of fear through him. His heart pounded in his chest as he approached the door, the knocking growing louder with each step. Standing behind the door, Jacob hesitated, his hand trembling as he reached for the doorknob. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a heavy silence that pressed down on him like a weight. He held his breath, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the knob. To his surprise, the door swung open at his touch. The room beyond was small, barely more than a closet, dimly lit by a single flickering candle that cast long dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with scent of mildew and something else, something dark, unimaginable. Jacob's eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. Walls covered in paintings, each one more disturbing than the last. Yeah. The paintings depicted scenes of terror, scenes of horror, scenes of despair, twisted visions that seemed to crawl from the darkest corners of the human mind. One showed a man trapped in a burning house, his face contorted in agony as flames licked of his skin, and another depicted a woman drowning in a sea of black, her hands clawing at the surface as she was dragged down the depths of hell. Each painting was vivid, so lifelike that Jacob felt as though he could hear the screams of the figures trapped within the frames. And as he moved deeper into the room, Jacob's gaze was drawn to paintings in the center of the wall. It was larger than the others. Its frame glistened, its frame. What caught his attention was the scene it depicted. You see, it showed a family standing outside the mansion, their faces turned towards the viewer. The father was tall and strong like the mother, graceful and kind like the boy. And the boy looked exactly like Jacob. His heart pounded, raced as he realized that the painting was his own damn family, captured in perfect detail as they had appeared on the day they moved in. The figures were frozen in the frame, frozen in time, their expressions blank, almost lifeless. But as Jacob stared at the painting, the figures seemed to shift, their faces slowly twisting into expressions of fear, expressions of anguish, expressions of sadness and blood. The boy's eyes, once bright with curiosity, was now wide with terror. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Horrified, Jacob stumbled backward, his breath coming in short. Panicked gasps. He had to get out. He had to get out now. He had to leave the room before whatever face had created the paintings could take hold of him too. He turned to flee, but the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping him inside. The candle flickered widely, casting a grotesque shadow on the walls as the paintings seemed to close in around him. Jacob pounded on the door, his fist bruising against the unyielding wood. "Help me! Let me out of here! Help! Help!" he screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness, the walls closing in tighter, the air growing thick and suffocating. The paintings figured on the walls, figures on the walls, they seemed to reach out towards him, their twisted faces filled with malice and despair. In a last desperate attempt to escape, Jacob threw himself at the door, but it was no use. The room was alive with a malevolent force, and it had claimed him as its own. The last thing Jacob saw before the darkness consumed him was his own reflection in the glass of the nearest painting, his face now pale and contorted with terror, his eyes wide with realization that he was now part of the cursed collection. The next morning, the mansion was quiet. The storm had passed. Helen and David awake to find their son's bed empty, his room undisturbed. Panic set in as they searched the house, calling his name, but there was no sign of Jacob anywhere. It was as though he had simply vanished. Their search eventually led them to the hallway where the painted door stood closed, as it always had been. But this time, something was different. You see, the door, once chipped and faded, was now smooth and freshly painted, the wood gleaming in the morning light, and on the wall beside it, where the paint had always been cracked and peeling, hung a brand new painting, a painting of a young boy, his face twisted in a silent scream, his eyes filled with a terror that would never fade. The Tanners left the mansion that very day, unable to bear the weight of the loss of their child. The mansion once again fell into the despair, its secrets now hidden behind the locked doors again. But those who passed by the old house would sometimes speak of the painted door and the boy who had been lost to its curse forever, trapped within the walls of the haunted room. The painted door remained closed, its secrets locked away, waiting for the next soul, brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. Madam Mina, that was a tale that I will never forget. Tell us, what do you have in store for us in our next tale?
This one is another spooky tale submitted to Reddit by the user Churros Ricos. I used to have this reoccurring dream where this black figure with no face would visit me and try to possess me. It would typically enter my being through my mouth, and at that point I would have no control over my dream. It would tell me to do the most terrible things to people, and it had a scratchy voice. The weirdest part that every time it would be inside me, I physically would feel ill. I would wake up with the same feeling, often times vomiting right away. The last time this happened must have been 3 years ago. Okay, back to you, Dr. Fright.
Thank you, Madam Mina, and thank you to our new Frightful fan. Please like and subscribe so you will know when Dr. Fright and Madam Mina go live. We are glad to have all of our Frightful fans here. This truly is a magnificent hour of frightful terror. Which brings us to our next frightful tale. This tale may take us on a journey to a unique train ride. I call this tale The Midnight Train. In the small fog-drenched town of Hollow Creek, where the nights were long and the mornings slow to rise, there was an old legend that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. It was the story of the midnight train, an ancient rustled locomotive, an ancient locomotive that appeared only at the stroke of midnight. Now the townsfolk whispered of the train's ghostly passengers, souls of those who had died in a terrible, terrible accident many years ago, forever trapped between this world and the next, searching in vain for a way to reach the afterlife. Donald had always been fascinated by the trains, the clicky clock of wheels on the tracks, the hiss of steam, that shrill of cry, the whistle. These were the sounds that filled him with a sense of wonder and excitement. But even more than that, Daniel loved a good ghost story, and when he heard about the midnight train, a thrill of anticipation tingled in his chest. The other children in town were too afraid to even speak of the train, but Daniel was different. He wanted to see it for himself, to find out if the stories were true. It was a cold, foggy night, with the mist hanging in thick in the air like a ghostly shroud. Daniel decided to put his plan into action. His parents had long since gone to bed, and the town was quiet, the streets deserted. Daniel crept out of his house, careful not to wake or even make a sound. He made his way through the fog towards the old abandoned station at the edge of town. The station had once been a bustling hub of activity, but now it stood in ruins, its roof caved in, its platform overgrown with weeds. The air was damp and heavy, the fog swirling around Daniel's legs as if he walked into the platform. He could barely see a few feet in front of him, the fog so thick it seemed to swallow up the world. But Daniel wasn't afraid. No, he was determined to see if the midnight train was just that, old stories. Tick-tock, 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 as the clock in the town square struck midnight, Daniel's heart skipping a beat. The night was eerie silent, and the fog hanging in the air like a living thing. And then, faint at first, but growing louder, he heard it. He heard the distant sounds of a train whistle. A mournful, ghostly wail that sent chills down his spine. A moment later, the screeching of metal and metal pierced the night as the train pulled into the station. Its arrival heralded by a crush of cold air that seemed to come from out of nowhere. The train was just as the stories had described, old and decayed. Its once bright colors faded and peeling, its windows cracked and covered in grime. The engine hissed and sputtered, the metal growing as if under a great weight. The doors slid open with a slow, mournful hiss, revealing a dark, silent interior. Daniel hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. The train seemed to call to him, a low, instant pull that he couldn't resist, and he took a deep, deep breath and stepped inside. The door closing behind him with a final echoing clang. The interior of the train was cold and silent. the air thick with scent of dust and decay. The seats were covered in a fine layer of grime, the fabric torn and faded. The train began to move, its wheels clattering over the tracks, and Daniel felt a strange sense of unease settle over him. He looked around, and for the first time he noticed the other passengers. They were ghostly figures, pale and transparent, their eyes hollow and vacant, their faces devoid of emotion. They sat in the seats around him, their bodies still, their gaze fixed on the floor. As the train picked up speed, hurling down the foggy night, the ghosts began to stir. Their heads turned slowly towards Daniel, their eyes locking onto him with a chilling intensity. They whispered in unison, their voices soft and echoing like the rustle of leaves in the wind. Help us! Help us find peace! Help us find peace! Daniel's heart raced as he realized the true nature of the train. It was not just a ghostly relic. It was a vessel carrying the souls of the dead, forever trapped in endless loop, unable to reach their final destination. The train was cursed, doomed to ride the tracks for all eternity. Its passengers lost between worlds, searching for a way to move on. Panic gripped Daniel as the whispers grew louder, more intense. The ghosts moved. The ghosts moved closer, their hollow eyes filled with desperation and sorrow. He wanted to scream. He wanted to jump from the train and run, but his body was frozen, his feet rooted to the floor. The train hurled through the darkness, the scenery outside a blur of shadows and fog. The station's light faded into the distance as the train sped on. Daniel realized with a growing sense of dread that he had sealed his own fate by boarding the midnight train. He had become one of its passengers forever, bound to ride the tracks for all eternity, just like the ghost who now surrounded him. The last thing Daniel saw was the faint light of the station disappearing in the distance before the train vanished into the fog, leaving no trace behind. The next morning, the platform was empty, shrouded in mist, with no signs of the train or the boy who had dared to board it. The villagers searched for Daniel, but he was never seen again. Now, the legend of the midnight train grew stronger after that night, a cautionary tale for those who might be tempted to venture to the station at midnight. The train still rides the tracks, its ghostly whistle echoing through the night. You can still hear it every night, carrying the souls of the lost, forever searching for peace that they will never find. Do you dare to ride the train? And now we send it over to Matt and Nina for our final haunting, frightful tale of the evening.
This was submitted to Reddit by the user Lindsay2983. She goes, I have a story. It isn't mine, but it happened to my uncle. He used to tell this story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle Mark went on a mission at 19. They sent him to an Indian reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion named Carl. When they first got there, there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation with them being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl staying on the reservation grounds. Eventually, they came to a compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big, and it was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night they were trying to sleep when all of a sudden their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under their table for cover. Mark could distinctively hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people. After about 55 minutes, it stopped. The next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking that night before. The family got very quiet and then told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. They then go to a convenience store and they were talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused, they ask him, "Can't talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about the skinwalkers. He says they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their souls. They just walked out of there baffled. They thought it was just another scare tactic. So that night, the shaking started again. My uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, blew it open, and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw 3 animals run off. 2 were a wolf and 1 was a bear, but they looked strange, almost with human features. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on 2 legs and walked slowly toward the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so bad that when they called their mission president that next morning and asked to be moved, they were relocated that day. For a year, nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city, and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and they go to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We are driving through a dangerous area at night, so we can't make any stops. If you need to use the restroom, you need to go now." Jimmy says, "I'm fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark. I'm not kidding. Go do your business. Jimmy was insistent he was fine. So they hit the road. As they were about 30 minutes into the drive, they they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries. Jimmy starts complaining that he needed to pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on, "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you will need, but you will do your business next to the door. And if I say get into the car, you better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right," opens the door and starts to do his business. In about 5 seconds, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out. What's going on? The mission president just says nothing and just increases his speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car on his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car. When they arrive, they didn't speak through the whole ordeal and says, "What did I just see?" The mission president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." That wraps up my spooky stories for this evening, Dr. Fright.
All right. Thank you, Madam Mina. Where am I at? Ah, yes, Dr. Fright is here. This has been a frightful hour of terror and terror, stories and terror. This has been the most frightful Fright Files we have had so far, and Madam Mina closed our night with a captivating story of pure, solid frightness. I cannot wait to see what Madam Mina has in store for us on this next frightful tale. This has been a frightful hour. I want to say thank you to all of our new frightful fans in the chat, and for those of you joining us for the first time. If you're still here, and you are, thank you for surviving till the end. Dr. Fright and Madam Mina says, keep being scared. We will see you next week for the Fright Files.